Welcome to another War Game review from theplayersaid.com. I'm Grant.
And I'm Alexander.
Today we played a new game, which is really a diamond in the rough. I don't know that anybody knows much about this game. One, it's new. Two, it's from China, Formosa Force Games. It's actually a dual language game. There's part of the rule book that's Chinese.
Full Mandarin rule book.
Yeah.
The board flips over and it's all in Mandarin as well.
So I'm going to be honest, I think this is a very interesting game that I'm excited and glad that we played it, frankly.
Yeah, it was cool.
I'd like to get the other guys together and play this because it plays up to 4.
Yeah, this is a 2 to 4 player game. We played it 2-player.
Yes.
Where one player does the Axis, so the Japanese and the Germans, and the other player does the Allies, which in this game it's the USSR and the UK.
With China and the US kind of as non-participating.
You can get them into the war,
right,
and they kind of join your faction
later.
And you get more stuff, but you have to work at that.
Yeah. But this game is it's a war-themed Euro game with Euro-based mechanics. It's basically area movement, point-to-point area movement. You have restrictions on movement. Some you have to have boats to go in, blue circles. You have to invade land or coastal regions with tanks first. I mean, it's a really neat war-themed Euro game. Greatest meeples I've ever seen, frankly.
Yeah.
We were talking about that.
Watch the unboxing. I'll show you a bit here in a second, but there's little tank meeples and there's little kind of cruiser meeples.
It's so cool.
And that's just, you have naval units and you have ground
land
units. And the map's an abstraction, and I'll show you that in a bit here as well. Basically, the whole world is shown in just kind of boxes of different shapes and colors.
Adjacent boxes, yeah.
And they're linked with either blue circles for Navy, like for sea. You have to
do a sea invasion or an amphibious landing.
Or there's like gray circles, which you have to do tanks first as well. So there's some pretty neat. There's a lot of thinking about, and the board actually has a lot more on it than it initially looked like.
Yeah.
There's some real strategy and some tactics as to how they've created the board and how you have to attack the board for some history there as well.
Although I would say this is definitely a what-if historical game.
Yes, absolutely.
It is set up really. I don't want to use the word sandbox because you really are limited by what you can do by what's adjacent.
Yes.
But you don't, and these don't always line up. The squares and boxes don't always line up with the way the world map is. I mean, they kind of do. For example, you can get into France from Germany without I'm sorry. Forget it. I messed up.
I feel like it's pretty decent.
Yeah, I think generally.
It's a very clever board that makes you really have to commit very heavily if you want to do certain things. Like getting from Italy to Tunisia, you have to have boats to get over there. And the German player has 2 boats.
Yep.
And that's it. So you can get guys into Tunisia, but as soon as you lose, if you lose that boat, you have to spend a whole turn and a bunch of actions.
Build another boat, move it over there. Yeah.
It can be pretty rough. So there's some really neat aspects to that.
I think this game really rewards planning beyond even the turn that you are in. Thinking about, okay, I want to do this, this, and this. How am I going to set my units up? One, to avoid being destroyed by your opposition. That was one of the great parts I liked about the game was you can move and attack in the same turn, and it became a strategic battle of back and forth. I'm going to move this guy up and destroy that unit you just placed.
Yes.
So then you learn, okay, I can't place that unit or move it in there until I'm really ready.
And which was cool. If you do that, then I can just build and attack you, and then there's now a couple extra empty spaces, and I'm like, oh, okay.
But there are lots of elements that are abstracted. Supply is abstracted. Supply really, in order to push forward, you have to have a continual line of your units leading back to your mother country, right? So you can't push ahead in Poland into Czechoslovakia without having units behind it.
Yeah, you can't vacate Poland and move all your units out. You have to keep a guy there. So then your lines get really stretched very thin, which is really cool and very thematic as well. So you've got to get a good rolling movement of tanks moving up, and that's very expensive and very difficult to do.
And it takes a couple of rounds to do as well.
And you're also at the mercy of your cards. This is a card-driven game. It's quite a simple card-driven game. You don't have like a ton of conflicting bits and pieces on there, but the cards each faction has their own color, and that dictates who can use the event on it.
If it's not your color, you can use it for ops, and that's it.
Or technologies.
Right, or technology advancement.
So there's a bunch of things that these cards can do. You can use them to just kind of face down. You can build a technology which will start at the beginning of next turn. Some of those give you discounts for buying, discounts for moving, discounts for attacking. There's some other kind of special bits and pieces.
You did rockets, which takes cards away from the allied hand. Very important.
That's like one thing you can do with the cards. The other thing is kind of the ops value. You know, I get 3 ops, I get 4 ops, I get 5 ops. That's how much I can do. I can move, attack, do all those bits and pieces.
Moving costs 2, attacking costs 3.
Yeah, and
building a unit costs 3, unless you have technologies that reduce all of those costs.
And that's kind of how that goes. If it's your color, so the Russians have a red card, they can use this event down here as well. Or the Germans, if it's a black one, there's an event. That same thing with the Japanese. So depending on the makeup of your hand, it's not one of those CDGs where, I've got a hand that's awful in the sense that I'm going to like trigger events that hurt myself. It's not like that. It's just, what can I make out of what I've got?
Well, and several times, and the op values go from the lowest is 3, the highest is 6.
Yes.
Printed. So you can use a 3 op value card for a very important movement or building something, and the better abilities are on the higher value cards, which is interesting. That's a design element where you tweak it because you want to make an agonizing decision. I'm going to give up 6 ops to build 2 tanks, which would cost 6 ops anyway, or maybe whatever. There's agonizing choices with that.
Yeah. Do I get the? I had, because the Japanese a lot of the time the event was like build a tank and a boat and then make a move.
Right.
Which is normally that's 8 ops.
Yeah.
And that's on a 6 op card. But I didn't have a boat to build.
Yeah, so and I ran into that several times.
So then I'm like, well, guess I'm just using 6 ops.
Yeah.
So there's some really cool choices to make on the cards of how you use those. It's a pretty tight game as well. Yeah,
I feel like it's very tight. The other thing I loved about the cards was the colors and doing the events. There's some diplomatic elements of those cards. So you play those diplomacy cards out, and they get you extra victory points at the end of the game. But if someone plays a higher value diplomacy card of that same country, you lose your card. So that's another thing we had to focus on and pay attention to. And you ended up trashing one of my diplomacy cards. So I love the multi-use elements of the cards, the ops, the technology advancement, as well as the events. Very well done.
So what we'll do is I'm actually going to show you the board and how all of that works, because it's a very neat mechanics, and then we'll kind of wrap up with a few final thoughts. So here's a look at the board, and as you can see, this is what I meant by having kind of an abstract board. You're kind of looking at, this is the North Pole, and the world is kind of spread out. So you have kind of Germany over here, and then France, the UK, Canada, and you've got Hawaii, and then around here you've got Baltics, USSR, Mongolia, Manchuria. So that's kind of how it's set up. It's a really, really interesting kind of board. Each of the areas is a different shape. So the square is like a land space, the circle is like an island, so here you have Marshall Islands. But then you have these octagonal ones, which are kind of coastal. So you have Japanese home islands, you have Nanjing, obviously that's coastal, and then you have Italy, coastal, and that affects what units can go in what spaces. Basically, you have on land, you can have tanks to ground units. In coastal areas, you can have a tank. You can have 2 tanks or 2 naval units, or a mixture of both. And then in an island unit, you can obviously have a couple of boats. So you get into some pretty interesting choices as far as how you move units, where you move units, and kind of what they're doing. I have a great time playing this one because there's so much to think about. These little connections here, so you have to move a land unit across here first. Or a blue one, you have to move a sea unit across here first. Can't drive a tank from Japan to China. But you start with these here, you move the boat in first, and then this guy can come along no problem. That kind of little following rule, it dictates the pace at which you're allowed to do certain things. So sometimes you're like, oh, I can get here, but you only have a couple tanks. You're like, crud. Now you got to build a boat here and then move it in, and that's just much more expensive than you may originally have thought. So the main mechanic of the game are these cards, deck of cards, and the cards are beautiful. We'll kind of just show you here. It's this kind of, they took historical pictures and they grayscaled them and kind of turned them into this almost pop art style. But it's very iconic. It's really, really neat looking game. But each of these cards has kind of three major aspects to it. At the top you have a technology which you can build. Then you have the ops value, and then you have this kind of event. So this one here, you can use this to build, it's like landing craft, so to speak. This means your naval units can move, and it only costs 1. Normally it costs 2 to move. To do that, on my turn, I would just place it face down, and then next turn, at the beginning of next round, this flips over, I now have that technology. You can do that once in a round. So you have to be very careful about which technologies you build. And so you want to get the early game ones down, like building discounts or movement discounts, so you can get maximized your usage out of those. So that's how the technology works, and there's some pretty interesting choices you got to make with those. Ops are ops, basically just gives you a value, and anywhere from 3 to 6 is the basic value on those. To move, the base cost is 2, 1, 2. To attack, the base cost is 3. So if I have a tank in Tunisia, a tank in Libya, the German tank attacks him, the German player plays 3 ops, boop, you just remove it. That's combat. There's no dice rolling, nothing like that. It's just this back and forth. And that's very, very important to note. And then to build a unit costs 3 as well. And you have your little supply of units. So I've got Japanese units over here, UK units, and you're limited by what you have. If you kind of look, this is the UK played card. They have 4 tanks, 4 boats, and if America joins the war, another 2 tanks and another 2 boats. So you're limited by the pool of what you have, but building a ship costs 3. Boom, I can build it in my home islands where it has these little kind of light icons, and that's what you're allowed to build there. So Australia can build a boat. If I had another 3 ops, like if I played a 6 ops card, I can build a boat and a tank. And that's all 6 of my ops. And that's it. That's what they do on their turn. You just play 1 card and you go around the table. Then you play another one, then you can start moving them. You play another one, you start attacking, things like that. But that's basically the core mechanic of those ops. That's what you're using them for. If you ever have change, so I play 5 ops, I'm going to build a boat. I don't want to use these last 2. I can save this. And this is worth 1 op. Even though I had 2 left, it's only ever worth 1. And on a later card in that turn, I'm going to play another 5 ops, plus 1 is 6. I got 6 ops, great. Now I can build a boat in Canada and a tank in Australia, because that's 3 ops apiece. So you can save 1 for later on in the turn. That is possible when you can't make change like that. And then the last thing are these events. And the events are what are faction specific. So here, this is a Russian event. They can play this on either themselves or their kind of allied faction. Their teammate is what it's called. So when it's Russian turn, I can play this on myself. This one means I get +1 op on every other op that the Russian player plays for the rest of my turn. If I'm feeling generous as the Russian player, I might give this to the UK. And then the UK gets a +1 for each card they play at each of their subsequent turns that round. That's kind of what all of those are. There is the diplomacy here. So the Germans can play this, and that basically gives them 3 victory points. That's kind of diplomacy with Spain. Now, the important part with diplomacy is we'll kind of take a look here. This one here, diplomacy with Turkey. The UK plays this, but that one's only worth 1 victory point. And if later on in the game, the Russians play their diplomacy one, this is a 3 value. So the Russians play their 3, they're going to get this 3 points, and the UK is going to discard this one because it's lesser. Basically, their ideology and their diplomacy is more effective. This is going to get discarded. Now, doing that within your kind of team might not be the best idea, but it becomes really important. For example, the Russians might try and influence Sweden, while the Germans might try and trump that, and they get rid of this Russian one, and then the Allies are like, oh no, where's my one? Then the Allies might try to influence Sweden. There's a 3 value one, obviously I can't find it. Oh, here it is, the UK one. That's going to discard this German one, and now the UK has the 3 ops. Now, again, what's really important with this is, yeah, this is 3 ops, this is 3 victory points, I mean. These ones that were discarded, they'll get shuffled into the deck later on in the game, because you'll have a reshuffle. When this one gets pulled again, the German player, if he gets this, can play this. It's worth fewer points, but when this is a lower number, there's only 2 versus this 3, it won't discard this one. So they both have those out. So there is an option when your diplomacy fails to try and get it back out again later to get those points again. But you can't trump higher numbers with lower numbers. So that's another little mini game within this game. Most of the other events are things like, so this is 4 ops. Normally this is kind of like to build something is 3, and then you've got 1 op, useless, or you can move twice. This one you can build and then move, which is the equivalent of 5 ops early in the game. So you get a little bit extra out of those actions. Same with this one here. This is a negative one. It's the counterpart to that +1 Russian one we looked at here. I play this on the enemy. They get -1 for all of their ops the rest of the turn. Very powerful. This one's a really simple one. This is 4 ops for everyone, but it's 5 ops if the German player plays it. This one, 5 ops, or they can build 2 tanks, which is normally 6 ops. Now, you get into some, again, very interesting choices where if I've built the cheap tank technology, well, my tanks only cost me 2 apiece. This is not nearly as, this is 4. I would spend 4 with ops and have 1 spare. So with the technology, these events kind of get phased out, which I think is very, very interesting. We also played with the little mini peace expansion. Each faction has a peace card which they can play. It gets them 2 victory points, plus 1 for their other diplomacy cards that they have out. So you can get a lot of points out of this. Or you can use it for this special event, or special ops value, which is +1. Basically, you play this, and then you draw a random card from the deck, 4, and I add +1 to it, so I just have 5 ops. So you can use it that way, and you can get some pretty nice combos out of that, getting some pretty high values out of what was essentially a useless early game card. So that's a nice little addition. I recommend playing with that every time, if you can get a hold of that. But that's a lot of what the game is. The movement is really tight. Your cards and your hand is very tight, and then the movement and the combat's interesting. You get that 5 value. You say, okay, let's see, like a boat, for example. If you have 5 ops, you say I move 2 ops and I'm going to attack Hawaii for 3 ops. Boom, and you just remove that. Really simple. Great. That's how it works. Well, then it's the UK's turn. They might, and if they control the US, because you have these little tracks down here, right? You have to bring the US into the war. Once the US into the war, they're like a controlled sub-faction for the UK. Well, the US has a card here that's like, oh, here we got 6 ops, nice. So I'm going to build a boat for 3, then I'm going to move 2, which is 5, now I've got a spare op. It just undid what I did. And that's what a lot of this game is it's this back and forth struggle, trying to kill enough and to keep this momentum going as you build more units and move them up, build more units and move them up, and you keep this going, because each of these spaces is worth a victory point, 2 victory points, 3 victory points. That's what these little stars are. If it's no star, just 1 victory point. And you're just trying to spread this out and keep this going. And the important part to note is these guys cannot move up and leave this blank. These are now out of supply, and that's an involuntary movement. You can do this, they're all on supply because there's a chain of controlled countries back to the home islands. But as soon as this guy, you can't voluntarily move out here. Now, if somehow, it can't happen here, but it is possible, for example, for somewhere to be caught out of supply. For example, if you had made it all the way into the USSR, and, well, no, that's not a good example. Okay, so if Germany had made it all the way into Canada, and then there was some, I don't know, if someone had cut them off, this guy's out of supply, which is fine, he can't move and attack, but that's the only way it can happen. You can't voluntarily put yourself out of supply. But really, that's the crux of this game. It's, do I put down technologies? Do I try and do big attacks? How much can I make out of what cards I have? And it's a fun game. It's a blast, and it's really quick playing. You're not lost in charts and dice rolling, and it's a good one. So I'll wrap up with some few final thoughts here.
So we got to look at the board. We talked a little bit about the game. Alexander, what was something you really liked about this game?
I guess I was surprised by how many tough choices I had to make.
Yeah.
Because it's moving guys around, moving and attacking. The more spaces you have, the more victory points you have. That's a very simple concept, but
executing that
is very difficult.
Yeah.
Executing it well.
Yeah.
And because creating moving chains of your units to actually spread your influence and do that effectively and maintaining that is very, very expensive.
Yeah.
And I think that's very difficult to do. And then on top of that, the clever design of the board forces you to make sure you have the right unit composition in certain places and can really hamper what you're trying to do.
Yeah.
I also enjoyed that the US and China started off as these kind of neutral allies, and there was a couple ways to get them in. The Allied faction can do lend-lease to them once per turn to kind of move them up the track, get them closer to it. But if ever I attacked or invaded them, it would kind of expedite that as well.
Right. And they had pieces sitting on the board that really sat there and were unable to be used until they were committed to the war.
And so then the Japanese, for example, are faced with some really, really tough decisions. Do I move and invade the Philippines?
Yeah.
If I do, that's going to move up that Allies join the war track twice.
Which you did, but
yes.
It's almost like you have to, because if you have any hope of expanding, you have to do that.
But if I do that, and then I do Pearl Harbor and attack and invade
then all of a sudden they're in the war.
They're in the war immediately, and it's 1942,
and that can be devastating.
And you're like, okay. So there's some really, really interesting choices to be made from the board standpoint, and again, the way those units move. To move any tanks out of the Japanese home islands, like over to Manchuria, have to have a boat move into Manchuria first.
It's an island, right?
And then they can kind of ferry over.
Yeah, tanks don't swim.
But if the Russians can come in and kill that boat, I gotta build another boat.
Yeah.
I gotta move another boat out, and then I can start ferrying my tanks again.
Yeah.
So it can be very, very interesting keeping those supply lines open with the different terrains, which is just interesting.
The other thing that I really enjoyed about the line concept or maintaining that supply, for instance, I was the Allies, so Russia has 9 tanks, right? So Russia has 9 tanks at their disposal. And the number of spaces from Russia to Germany is 4. So in order to get there, I have to really commit a lot of my forces to that. I can't be almost dabbling in 2 fronts because I don't have the units. So it became an exercise in managing those resources to get what you needed to get and do what you wanted to do rather than doing everything. You just don't have the resources.
Yes.
And that's very thematic and historical. And the same with Germany. You had 2, 4, 5, 6. You had 9 tanks.
10 tanks.
10 tanks. So it's the same thing. You really got to decide what you want to do.
And I think that unit limitation is interesting because each faction has a different unit limit.
Right.
Like the Japanese have 7 tanks, but
5 boats.
But building boats, well, now you can't build any more boats. And so then those boat events become useless. And then it's a case of, I can move those over here towards America, but they're pretty useless going over towards the USSR.
Just can't do much.
And making that choice of which flank do I kind of want to focus on, you can start getting into some pretty interesting. It's such a cool cool system.
I also really liked the concept of, as the Japanese, you had to make decisions about, do you crush China?
Yeah.
And we decided, yes, you should.
And very early on.
You should do it in the first round, if not by the second round, because you need to get that out of the realm of possibility for the Allies to attack you.
Yeah.
It only takes 2 card discards for the Chinese to get into the war. So the Allies can commit to that and get them in pretty quick, and then it's just another thorn in the side of the Axis.
But that's a huge swing. If the Japanese can take that, that's 3 points for them,
Right.
and it keeps the Chinese units out because they can't build them there.
Right.
And then I can focus a bit more about protecting my other flanks. So it's very interesting.
Very interesting. The other concept I liked, but we didn't really use a whole lot, was the flag connections.
Yes.
So, for instance, the Balkans connects to Romania, right? So I could have started moving into your back door, but it then becomes, I'm going to push units in there only to sacrifice them, really, to tie you up, and then prepare to kind of crush you from the, from
and
Russia.
And it leaves the Ukraine a bit more vulnerable from counterattacks from Poland. The connections and the map, again, is so wily. It's really, really, really tough, some of the choices you have to make. And there's we didn't play with this, but there is an Arctic expansion where you just kind of cut this out and you just put it in the middle.
So it gives you more choices.
Yeah, basically connects Norway to Germany and the UK, and Iceland to the UK and Canada. And so you just have even more opportunity just to kind of mess around and skip around places.
And that's historical, right? We've played games on, what was that one game where Iceland, Operation Icarus.
That was ahistorical because that
well,
happened.
I know, but it's a historical concern that you have to think about if you use that expansion.
Yes.
Just adds more difficulty and tension to the prosecuting of whatever you are trying to do.
So yeah, I don't know about you. I had a great time playing this.
Oh, I loved
this.
Playing
was a really cool game. Now we played with 2. I would like to play this with 4.
Would love it.
Just because that would make it go a little bit faster.
Because you have fewer cards.
Yeah, towards the end game, I've got 9 cards. And I'm like, oh, who wants to do what? Whereas if this was a 4-player game, I'd only have my own faction and I'd have 5 cards.
Right.
So I would be like, this is what I'm doing.
Yep.
This is what I'm doing.
Yep.
It just takes down a little bit of that decision making, made it a bit quicker. I think anyway.
Yeah.
And it's always more interesting with more people because they might do something unexpectedly, like stop doing that.
Well, and 4 players, you have 4 different ways of trying to do things. It would just make it more interactive and more fun.
Yes.
But I would have to say this is a breath of fresh air.
Yeah.
I really enjoyed this game. I would love to play it again and learn better some of the strategies. We found out kind of after the first play that technology is utterly important.
Yes.
And I think I dabbled in it, you dabbled in it. I think we would have done more early on.
And being judicious about which technologies you take, because you can't get them all.
No.
It's not going to happen.
It's impossible.
So you have to be very, very choosy. I want to do this, and that's going to commit me to doing this type of a campaigin, for example.
Yeah.
You did ones where it gave you very cheap movement.
Yeah, cheap movement and building tanks and boats cheap.
Tanks, I can build them cheap and I can move. So then you can get this huge wave of Russian tanks, nice and easy.
Very efficient. The other thing that's very interesting about that technology concept is when you put a technology card down, you're looking at the icon, but you'll notice this is a Russian card that Alexander played, and it's a 6-op Russian card. So you played it down. Guess what? That takes that away from me as a playable card. That doesn't go back to the deck.
And I did that in the first round specifically.
And you did that on purpose. Mine, I think we didn't shuffle as well as we maybe should have. Because you'll notice all my cards played were my own colors. And I played those technologies in the first couple of rounds. So technology, I think, is very key. I love that concept. And it's always like that. Triumph and tragedy is the same way. If you don't build a couple of technologies, you're going to be in trouble.
You'll just be so far behind with those advantages. And I felt like that's where the Japanese were at the end game.
Yeah, they had no technology.
Expensive to do anything. I was like, ugh.
And particularly at the end, you drew cards that were 3 ops.
Yeah, what was it?
So if you'd had lesser move and lesser build, you might have been able to do more things. I just really like this game. It's a thinky game. I really feel like you have to consider each move. And you have to consider what your opponent is going to do with each move. Because the reality is, we wouldn't move into certain places because we knew if we did that, that unit was going to be destroyed.
This game has the two rule books. This
Yep.
is a translated rule book as well.
Yes.
So I just wanted to... It's actually pretty decent.
Yeah, it
I was
wasn't
surprised.
bad. Yep.
I was surprised at how fine the translation is. Sure, it's not perfect, but most of the stuff in there, errors-wise, are like something wasn't pluralized.
They used the wrong preposition or
But
something.
there wasn't anything where I was
major.
like, what are we doing? There was one part of the rulebook that was unclear because it says when you play a diplomacy card, you score it, the VPs immediately.
Right.
Which you do, but those can be taken away from you
Because they can be removed from the board.
But then there's a part in the rules where it says you score them at this point.
So don't score them when you play them. Score them, and really it was at the end of the game.
End of each round.
Yeah, at the end of each round.
That's kind of so that was like but then everything else was very clear.
Yeah.
I felt, considering it was a translated rulebook, so that's nice. You don't have to worry about that kind of thing. Some games you're like, okay, what is this?
Gonna be tough.
I don't feel that way. This is a well-produced game.
Yeah.
The components are excellent. I love the art style on the cards.
Mike Yuan, Y-U-A-N, was the art director. Fantastic job. They took historic pictures and kind of did
almost like a
wash over them.
grayscale pop art style.
Looks really great. Love the colors, love the icons. And the designer is, and I'm going to butcher it and I'm sorry, Wei Cheng. Fantastic game. I mean, it really is.
Yeah, it's cool.
I enjoyed it quite a bit. I think this is one that if you can somehow get your hands on a copy and try it, particularly if your group likes Euro wargame themed games, this is a fantastic game. It really is. We played it in about 2.5 hours. I think it's designed for 90.
And it would be 90 minutes next time.
If we knew the rules and understood things. By the end, we were clipping rounds off. I think we went very quickly. But it's a great game, very enjoyable, very fun to play. I definitely would give this a thumbs up.
Anyone could play it.
Yeah.
This is not a complex game.
No.
You could play this with a lot of people, and a lot of non-war gamers, I think, would enjoy this, even though it has a war theme on it.
Right.
If you're playing Kemet or Cyclades or Blood Rage, those type of games, this is very much accessible to those kind of people as well.
Agreed. Very, very good game. So I've been Grant for the Player's Aid. I've really enjoyed this game. Glad that we were able to play it. Look for this one. I'm actually going to highlight this on my next edition of Wargame Watch. I'm going to put a little write-up in it. And now that we've played it, I'll have a little more information. I'm Grant.
You might have to retroactively look at that Wargame Watch by
right, depending on when we get this up. But I've been Grant for the Player's Aid.
And I've been Alexander.
Thank you.